especially if they're aspiring writers. So what about you guys? What drew each of you guys to the real life context of your stories? Um, Take it away.
Cool. So for me, it's a few things. Obviously, the unresolved, I guess you would call it like the hangover of the US Civil War, tilts modern politics in all kinds of healthy and constructive ways. So that has a lot of passive interest for me. And that's sort of my like where my gravity as a history nerd is. I mean, there are obviously, other times and periods, but this has a lot of just kind of relevance to my day-to-day life, observations, experiences, etc. But there is also, even outside of, what's important about it, which, given my clownier tendencies, isn't always my first thought. I think it's kind of, I mean, it's an intuitively interesting setup to me. One thing is that the entire Pickett's charge incident, which, is very early in the book, I can say that without spoilers, that interesting stuff happens with it. That has kind of been a borderline running joke, inside joke, etc. Just something an incident who's like sort of, it's very tragic because, there are a lot of people dying avoidably for what amounts to someone's gamble or ego, but and at the same time there is almost this slapstick element to it, and the whole project was actually born as a short story about that incident, and I found I kind of had a lot of momentum, a lot of tension around that area, and I tried to keep rolling, but I'm starting to ramble now. Oh,
That was super, super interesting. Not rambly at all. I would say I accidentally stumbled upon the historical fiction label. That was really not my aim. At first, I wrote very autobiographically. I grew up in China as a biracial kid in the 1990s and 2000s, which was a time when China was undergoing kind of massive economic development and demographic change. And kind of similar to what you were saying, Dennard, like I just had so many observations and feelings about race and class and all these dynamics that I just had absorbed since I was a kid that were kind of bubbling up, and I wanted to write about them. It would never have occurred to me that it was historical fiction, at least not the present day timeline. Present day, being in quotation, which is set in 2007, 2008 Shanghai, which is when I was a teenager there. But the novel did become more squarely historical when I added a secondary narrator, Lu Feng, who is the stepfather of the teenage protagonist. And his storyline, as Ian was saying, actually starts in 1985 and then kind of converges back towards the present, aka 2008 moment. And so that part definitely felt very different to write because it went from intensely autobiographical, hardly any research because I was like, this is my neighborhood, this is the school I went to, this is the mall I went to, these were the movies I watched. Like, I'm just writing from my brain to like, oh, 1985 in China, like every year during that time period was so different in terms of what was introduced and the kind of economic changes. So, but it felt like it would enrich the story to add that secondary narrator. So I took on the challenge of adding kind of that historical thread. But I would say the divide in the novel, I mean, I feel like at least 60-70% of the narrative is still the teenage girl, and then the historical thread is relatively shorter in terms of sheer pages, and that might reflect the fact that I just knew less about that world and kind of how to enrich it. And I think that's what I admire about historical fiction writers is just the research that goes into world building of an era that you might not know firsthand and might never be able to know.
well put.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's yeah, it's sorry to cut you off. Yeah, no, yeah, historical fiction authors I've always thought seem to be, I mean, all authors research to some extent, right? But like, um, of all genres, it seems like historical fiction writers appear to come the closest to time traveling. It's just uncanny. Um, Were you you guys both spoke about observation, taking note of for you it was observing your surroundings and life as you were growing up in China. Dennard, it was the picket charge that you took an interest in. Um, and what was there? I'm curious since this is something I wonder about for my own writing. Outside of research material, outside of like academic sources or autobiographical impressions, were there any fiction books that inspired your thoughts? Like in fiction books that overlapped with your interests or your direction when you were writing these books. Yeah. Any
Oh, do you
other?
want to go or should I?
Yeah, I'm gonna take it away, man. Take it away.
Oh, I mean, okay, so yeah, there's I mean, I guess there's a long line of these sort of great sort of satires about like contemporary wars. I mean, you see Good Soldiers Effect sort of take on World War One before that author unfortunately passed away. They didn't get to finish it, but still have this great text. There's Catch 22, which I talk about entirely too often, Mother Night, etc. So I did kind of have all of those in the back of my mind when I was writing this. Like, what do I pull from? What do I try to avoid to, seem too much like an assembly line clone? And I really do speak from a place of kind of respect and admiration for a lot of those books. Even there was I mean, even MASH was like a novel first, and that had its own take on, psyches on the ground and sex and everything. And I really I really found that there was kind of a rich kind of literary tradition in terms of just like going at wars with this comic lens. You can even run all the way back to Lysistrata or whatever. But my particular fixation really is kind of Catch 22 and World War II because I found that it had such it had this wonderful spin on how absurd the entire machine of slaughter really is. And you could even say that I kind of take a bit of that attitude and that perspective to just a different time period and some different micro fixations, but some of that same still lines up. And that I guess those would be my like chief fictional influences. I mean, I did read a lot of sort of contemporaneous 1860s kind of stuff too, and it is all interesting. And even take some things like Red Badge of Courage, etc., as like it kind of influences how I try to write someone who becomes heroic or non-heroic throughout this whole experience. But I would yeah, when it comes to fiction, it's like just that sort of long line that goes all the way from basically like Lysistrata to like Slaughterhouse Five or something is kind of in my head. And yeah.
Okay. Okay. Hang on. Yeah, no, red badge of courage. Yeah, yes, I was. Yeah, I remember that. You mentioned World War II as well.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, World War II has a lot of these books. Again, you have your Slaughterhouse Fives, Catch 22s, etc. And I think that obviously there's some scale to the conflict that gives the absurdity a certain flavor. And that was actually something I really enjoyed in this process was that I did find it felt it felt that important hair different to have this difference to have to bring this kind of attitude to this different arena.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. Oh. Oh. Do you? Okay. Man, Colin has managed to unmute you, so there we go. Any sorry, refreshing. Were there any fiction books that inspired your thoughts while you were writing River East, River West?
Yes, definitely. And thank you for unmuting me. I accidentally locked myself in. I actually, I think I started out writing the book almost as a response to certain works of fiction that I thought didn't exist.
Mm,
Let me back up. When I was in high school, so I went to Chinese public school most of my upbringing, and then for 2 years of early high school, I switched over to an international school in Shanghai and kind of was thrown into the expat world, and my mind was blown in a bad way. Like I was like, how can people live with such indifference and condescension to this society that I, up to this point, was like squarely identifying with, and now I'm hearing referred to as like locals, or in these very more derogatory ways. And at the time, so the curriculum of this international school was in English, and in the English class, we were assigned to read A Passage to India by E.M. Forster and Empire of the Sun by J.G. Ballard. And and I think we watch the movie, or maybe I watch Empire of the Sun on my own too. And these are two works of fiction, historical fiction by today's standards. At the time they were published, I'm not sure. There was probably a lot less of a gap. But yeah, obviously, A Passage to India takes place during kind of British colonial times, and Empire of the Sun is actually really interesting because it takes place during World War II, but in Shanghai at an internment camp run by the Japanese, but which was interning the foreigners, the expats that were living in Shanghai at the time. And both novels, I mean, I have no beef against those novels. I thought they were very rich and very good in many different ways. They both spoke pretty scathingly about colonialism in Asia, with kind of mixed, I mean, characters of different races. And we were talking about these books in class and talking about colonialism in Asia, but treating it as if it were squarely historical fiction with no current bearing on our classroom and our school and this pocket of, expats living in pretty extreme privilege compared to the options they had compared to the locals. And we're reading these books drawing no connection. And for me, I was like, but a lot of expats live basically on a golf course in a segregated part of town and only interact with Chinese people as their employees or as service staff. And so many of the dynamics in these books are actually not historical fiction. Like, they're so relevant to contemporary China. And although we don't call expats colonials, a lot of features of expat society share a lot with colonialism. And so I wanted to write a book that felt like, A Passage to India, but was more applicable to kind of modern day China. And especially, I just felt like there weren't so many books about modern expat culture that was critiquing it the same way we have works of literature critiquing colonialism coming out, from that era, at least not in Asia that I was encountering. So that's kind of the impetus of why I set out to write my book.
I really appreciate that drive you had to challenge to challenge the mindset that okay, yes, these people, um they exist, and they've carved out a pocket for themselves in that in China, in that part of town, but they're consuming these works of fiction, but they're somehow not either willfully or unknowingly just not drawing the connection. Um, as far as okay, so when it comes to okay, I'm trying to segue into the publication experience um as you mentioned, Passage with India, is it Passage with India? I can't remember. Um, yeah, so that's an established novel. It went through the industry and everything before yours, obviously. Um, but I'm very curious to know how, like, when you were entering River East and River West into, the publishing industry, and what did you like, how did you present that? Or did you present that as a reversal of, books like that? The books that you mentioned, you presented as a reversal of that, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's actually very astute that you use the word reversal because that was a huge part of the presentation and marketing of the book was calling it a reversal of the traditional East to West immigrant narrative in terms of it was kind of scrutinizing the West to East expat narrative because I mean I think a lot of readers are probably more familiar with fiction when it comes to these kind of multiracial kind of commentary type books that a lot of them, at least in the US, I think readers are more acquainted to stories that take place in the US that might deal with immigrant families and immigrant narratives. And that was obviously not my book. So it was, I think, kind of a trick of marketing and positioning to be like, this is also a story of people of different races and cultures kind of adapting or integrating or not, or having conflict or having opposing attitudes in a certain place. But I will say that I never introduced my book or marketed it or pitched it as historical fiction. It was squarely a coming of age
Okay.
story. And I think like objectively it is historical fiction, but it wasn't marketed that way. And I think it's because the kind of contemporary China narrative still, as I said, like that's really the majority of the book. And even though I'm sure Gen Zs will say 2008 is so historical, the truly kind of more
Right.
historical portions were a lot scarcer in comparison. Um, yeah, I'll stop there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think I grasp what you're saying. You're trying to say like a narrative work uh, uh is still relevant today. Does and hence the term historical fiction is a little um nebula. I think nebulous. I think. Okay. Would you say the same for your book, Dennard? Like um your I'm especially curious about yours because like How to Dodge a Cannonball was not only historical fiction, but it's also satire on top of that. Like, how did you like? I'm really curious about the how you presented it, how you sold it to them. Like, was the combination like I can't say I can't say I've heard of this combination before. Satire and historical fiction. Like, was it a hard sell in the industry? Um,
That is a great question. The sort of footwork of selling it, if I were to be 100% honest, is just my agent Reeves Hamilton, who is a superhero. So he says, "Hey, here's an experiment by an insane person. Would you like to pay for it?" And I do appreciate that work. But when it comes to talking about it, I find that is a common question because history, especially war history, is extremely loaded because a bunch of people died, and we don't enjoy that. And I think that I'm of the opinion, and this doesn't have to be the gospel truth, but I think that loadedness is kind of the appeal. In the same way that you find that how science fiction works and satire click in a certain way because they're both implicitly commentating on some
right,
aspect of where society's kind of headed. And we have
right,
a lot
right.
of work like that, and that's recognized as sort of a lane. I think there's a really similar intuitive fit with historical fiction and satire because with history, we depending on how settled the issue is, which is its own whole kind of thing I play with in this, it is already kind of loaded with these commentaries. These are things that have happened, will happen again. Have we learned or evolved at all? And all those things to me are extremely relevant just to satires, like basic interest. So I think that they maybe the marketing hasn't caught up, or it's not a huge genre crossover pocket. But I think structurally, intellectually, even the experience of consuming either, I think they are a really natural fit.
Mm, mm.
Call it a chocolate and peanut butter scenario.
That's that.
Oh,
Um,
there used to be these. Oh, wait, was that an actual question or a joke?
What's that?
Oh, wait, was that a question or a joke?
No, no. I said I love that.
Oh, love that. Oh, thank you, thank you.
Actually,
Um,
yeah.
so
Go ahead. Go ahead. Hmm? Is there more?
yeah, I guess I was just going to say that something that particularly helps with the way that sort of satire and historical fiction crossover, in my opinion, is sort of history is really, caught up in everything, has these, opposing camps. Like, are these material elements more important, or these great personalities, or was this side have more moral heft, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that satire plays extremely well in that kind of ambiguous space.
Mm.
I think that's one of the things that really drew me to talking about the Civil War in this way, because from textbooks to just conversations in a bar at 11 a.m., there are other interpretations of how things went down, or why they did. And obviously, I have my own fixations or bugbears. I found those interesting to get at. The sort of attempt to minimize how much of this was about slavery in a lot of narratives, or people saying, "Yeah, the Cornerstone speech, he was just drunk every week for 4 years," and that's to me that the entire idea of putting yourself in that mental hole is interesting. But now I'm going on.
Yeah. Mm. It's like how would you say what you call it? Okay, I'm curious to know how you when you guys were working. I'm curious to know about okay, once you guys got your books accepted into the publishing industry, like could you guys share about like um uh what was were there any what basically I'm trying to figure out like what challenges were did you guys encounter um while trying to like get this book from start to finish, like when trying to get the finished product, did editors get it? I mean, I know Dennard, you mentioned like your agent did your agent did the marketing and stuff like that, correct? Um,
At least the pitching to various publishers, that whole sword fight.
yeah. Did you guys have to like work with like editors and like kind of like talk about your vision with these guys or anything like that? Um, all yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think when you're selling a novel, by the point you are having a conversation with an editor, you hopefully already have figured out your vision, and it's more about, do they get your book? Do they share your vision? Are they trying to steer it in a way that, maybe your visions don't align? Um, because, right, as opposed to nonfiction, where sometimes you sell a book on proposal and then the editor is a lot more involved in crafting the direction of the book. With fiction, you usually would sell on a completed manuscript that then gets edited for like a couple years. So I think one thing that's really important when you're selecting whether or not to work with an editor, usually there's a phone call, there's a meeting of some kind where you make sure you are on the same page. And they explain what their revision notes would be, like broadly speaking, if you decide to move forward. And you as the author need to decide if that sounds good, if you're okay with that, or if the editor is trying to take it in a direction that you disagree with. So, in my case, that wasn't necessarily a challenge. My editor and I were very aligned on what needed work. And it mostly had to do with, craft issues like pacing and balancing out the character point of views and making the arc more propulsive. I think for me, the main challenge in publishing was matching the book to its audience. That was
Mm,
really hard. And I think the more niche the book is, or if it's kind of talking about an traditional subject matter. I think you yourself as the author and people in publishing are trying to figure out like who's the right audience for this book. And at first the impulse is to say everyone. Obviously, I want everyone to read my book. The audience is everyone. But then I think this is something I learned as a debut author that really to get that word of mouth going, to kind of get that ripple effect of readers finding the book and recommending the book, it's really useful to kind of identify some key groups that the book might speak to, and then make sure that the book is getting in their hands. And for me, that world felt pretty small if you just think of that key group as being like expats in Asia or people who know expats in Asia and want to read about how badly they behave. That's still like to me that sounds like a lot of people having grown up in Asia, but when you're talking about the US publishing market and the US reader market, you find out that that's like kind of a far away and quite small demographic as far as readers go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. That's always the challenging part. I think when finding like you said that the more niche a book, the harder it is to narrow down like a particular target audience. Yeah. I find myself wrestling with that as well when thinking about like who I want to write for. Um. Uh. Dinar, did you have any other insane people like yourself who want to read the book? Who like who your publisher was like, okay, we found
I
other than
think when it came to, so it's a great question. And when it came to, it's sort of different, like how I was dealing with editors, how I was dealing with, the public at large, right?
yeah.
Because when it came to editors, I think how I kind of mentally approached it is it's almost like dating. You realize you're not trying to necessarily pitch a certain version of yourself, but just like channel this channel this work as what it is, and it's in the best way you can, and you just see who it resonates with. And I was lucky enough to run into Retha, and I remember there were sort of three people like interested in the book as it was, right? And then you describe it, and one editor looks at you like, "Are you a human being from Earth saying these words?" And then there's another one who's like nodding on, like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And what if it was like an action thing? Like, what if he was like a Civil War Rambo? Like, not quite, not quite me. Love the vision, not quite what I put down. And then Retha was someone who just really got it, and I so appreciated her insight and energy. In terms of editorial challenges, I guess it's sort of a universal book challenge, but there were some sort of structural remodeling things that I actually heard the suggestion that, oh, you are right, and that is going to take 4 months. And but I did that work, and I really do like how the book was after that step. It's sort of mostly to do with if you read the book, there are a lot of formal inserts, formats, documents, etc. between chapters, and it was essentially sort of about the flow and number and sort of information content of those. I basically sort of completely redid them, but it was definitely for the best. When it came to the public at large, it's kind of interesting. There's a because they send you around to pitch the book, and I kind of ended up almost developing like two faces of talking about this thing. One to the general public, where I would just like sort of flatten everything down to this is a comedy about someone who keeps on switching sides during the Civil War, and I could talk about that. And I'm kind of grateful for my limited stand-up time during that experience because it just taught me about how important basically translating a joke is, making sure that you kind of lay the sort of breadcrumbs so that someone who just walks in here drunk at 4 a.m. can understand what you're talking about and why. So that was kind of helpful when talking to general audiences. And I kind of this is a little Pollyanna of me, or maybe I should compare it to Candide given my influence bank here, but I think that a lot of readers are essentially willing to try something if you kind of explain what the experience will be like.
Mm, okay.
There I think that there's just sort of at least there's a type of reader who's essentially very experimental, or otherwise I'm kind of wasting my time. But I kind of operate with that idea. So I never really think too much of. I have a kind of a dual relationship with pandering. I think I try to never really pander with content, and with a pitch, I will kind of go full 2 p.m. at the 8 p.m. at the Comedy Store kind of mode, because I think you can kind of make people understand what they're getting into, and then they'll ride with you to, I don't know, House of Leaves or Hamlet or whatever. If you just tell them this is about a guy going crazy in a house, and say, oh, okay, that's why this is so weird. Oh, I'll give this a shot, and that's part of why I feel free to be kind of experimental formally with topic, etc. But I'm kind of going on again. And then when it comes to people who are into this kind of thing, then I kind of just let it flow more naturally, because if
Makes sense.
if it makes sense to them, they know this is their kind of thing. That's almost those are almost kind of the people you don't necessarily need to think too much about, as long as you're just spending the time to go around, talk to people, do shows, etc.
Right. They'll just kind of like just they'll get it on their own, basically. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so I'm wondering, so like so here history through fiction, we were kind of small, we are kind of a small press. Um we always wonder, like, how do we um show support, how do we show support for uh, writers like yourselves who are writing, um what may be termed as niche novels, or novels that are uh, not necessarily not purely, or basically writers of color. We're trying to figure out how best to show our support for the writers of color community, and we know you guys are just two individuals. You can't speak for the entire community and stuff. But yeah, from you guys, it's like perspective, like how might we, and this is me wondering myself, as a writer of color myself, how best could a small press like us, like, support you guys, support authors like you guys, and if you guys have any ideas from your experiences. Yeah.
Well, that's a wonderful mission, and that's a really good question. And I mean, I think the Zoom panel, like what you're doing right now, is a pretty substantial way to show support for, especially if you are a small press, but you are not necessarily our publishers. I actually think it's very lovely to think that other presses and other publishers can more proactively organize events or organize dialogue or organize exchanges that are not just geared towards promoting and marketing their own authors, but are more about, kind of a genuine discussion about a subject matter that draws authors from many different presses together. So I think you're already doing something very valuable. I think in terms of being a writer of color in the industry overall. So I think what the industry could do better. I mean, so many things, but I will say for one, my experience as a as an Asian woman is like there is such, I think, a rigid kind of template and marketing and visuals for books by Asian women that have to do with Asian women. It's like there's always, I saw this meme before I got published and before my book cover got designed that said, if you're an Asian woman with a book coming out, your cover will have an Asian woman's face and flowers. And I was
Oh,
like, that's such a joke. I was like, ha 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 ha. Wow, what a joke from yesteryear. That's like, yes, like I have seen plenty of book covers like that, but surely it will not happen to me because it's ridiculous that all books by Asian women would have the same cover when our subject material is so different and we are so different. And like, sure enough, across many different publishers and cover proposals, flowers and like an Asian woman's face came up again and again and again. And I kind of won half those battles, but lost half those battles. But I guess if I had to, you know, have a hypothesis about why this happens, I think from a marketing point of view, they're just like, oh, people buy. This kind of design is a code for this is like book club fiction or historical fiction about Asian women. Like here's a lighthouse beam signal, like this cover connotates that. Um, and I think that is just kind of a way where marketing kind of flat. Like on one hand, as an author, you're like, well, if you're telling me that that will sell books and get people to open my book, of course I want that. But on another hand, it feels so reductive to be like, these elements have to be on your cover because of your ethnicity. That way, that signals to the readers it's a certain type of book, and you're more likely to sell these books. Of course, no one has explicitly said that to me in that way. That's just my guess about why these kind of visual motifs appear again and again and are very kind of racial coded.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think that's brilliantly put, honestly, the sort of pocket language of the book. I mean, okay, I have a partial advertising background, so this kind of stuff always jumps out at me pretty crazily. I laughed a bit too loud when he made that first point. But there are all it is such a fixed thing. Like, you have the face and silhouette and the filigree on the margin. I that spoke to me very well. Okay, so I'm going to try to not just copy paste what Aube just brilliantly put. I think that when it comes to, and I'm trying to think specifically as a author of color here, so I'm sort of looking at what's happened. So I'll try to make it. I'll try not to be too broad. I think that there's an odd thing, kind of when these projects are in the development stage, where they want to make sure, like, you kind of it is this actually is very similar. So I will not be saying something super different, but they kind of want to see how it fits into these sort of boxes that have been successful from people that looked like you before. I always remember I was sort of developing this thing with Writer's House, and they're like, "Could you make this more like Dear White People?" And
Oh.
remember blinking at that email and going, "Ah, but that show kind of sucks." Like I understand pandering, but that show, like if they had even just critical discernment, if they had walked up to me and said, "Could you make this more like The Sellout?" I agree. Let's work on that vision. But they said their wife was like, "Oh man." It's like, at least ask me to rip off Erasure or something. I don't know, but that was an interesting time with the whole Writers House thing. So yeah, I mean, you guys seem pretty plugged in, so I doubt you have anything that severe. But I guess that's like sort of the most pointed way the POC thing has impacted me. I do think that visibility things like this are really awesome for just helping, you know, authors on the margins. Like, just it's a good counterbalance to some of the innate difficulties, because you can't fix everything everywhere, but you can shape your own efforts, and this kind of thing really is wonderful on that front, and I appreciate you doing it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, we just wanted to, yeah, we as you guys know, as it's in our it's in our name. Um we focus on historical fiction, and we know there's like tons of like colorful, and I mean, not no pun intended, but like colorful and engaging and just like deeply interesting like flavors of BIPOC history out there, in the diaspora, or in other continents outside of America. So we're always just like, it's a rich mind out there, and we just hope writers just feel free to approach us, and like, either work with us either directly or in panels like this, which I'm so grateful you guys agreed to say yes to this. Just a couple other questions. We are wrapping up soon, I think. But yeah. So you guys mentioned just one more question. I think I'll defer to our lovely audience. But okay, when it comes to elevating BIPOC histories, like, do you guys have any insights for writers who are maybe intimidated by the weight of what they're trying to capture? Um, you know, what do you guys have to say to writers out there? But
Yeah, I mean, I would say to try to steer clear of the mindset that your work will have to bear that weight of be representative of a whole people or a whole history, right? That might be by writing that book, you're contributing something important to representation. You can view it that way, but it is not on your shoulders. It is not possible for one author and one book to represent. And so, when I think about my book and talk about my book, I say this is, well, first of all, it's very autobiographical. So it's like by definition, one very limited life experience and viewpoint that has really fed into the narrative. And I try to say I'm not saying all expats are like that. I'm not saying all multiracial family dynamics are like that. This is just one such family informed by factors that I experienced. And then also, I will say specifically about my book for the more historical sections, and with the kind of Chinese man I've been following, Lu Feng. I really wanted to. I did struggle with not wanting to write yet another like cultural revolution. Man, that was really tough. Oh, the Great Famine, that was really tough. Because I feel like there are kind of stereotypes of Chinese history that have cropped up again and again in English language depictions of that history. And it's like those events and those times were awful and they are worth talking about. But I didn't want to just, again, like cheaply borrow from these, like often discussed traumatic times to make a point in my book. And the Cultural Revolution did end up being in my book because I was like, there's no way around this if this character was this age at this time. Like history did happen, right? Like there's no way around it. But I can try to not just, you know, cheaply introduce it or sensationalize it because it's already such a well represented and well discussed feature of Chinese history, can I write about it from a way that feels a little bit different? Um, so yeah, that's a tip too. I guess your work doesn't need to represent everything, but also do try to steer clear of historical stereotypes that kind of lend that historical narrative power when you do use them or borrow them. Be considered about what you are contributing to the discussion of them.
makes sense, man. Dennard, uh,
That was very sharp. So when it comes to feeling a lot of nerves, tensions around touching certain topics or aspects of history or what have you, I have always been kind of a believer in chasing what makes you uncomfortable. That is a point of interest for you. That's kind of a flashpoint. I think a lot of good work comes from the things that create those emotions, the things that you are either consciously or subconsciously concerned with. So I would almost take it as a sign that you are onto something. My big thing with that question. And yeah, I guess that's real. I mean, not to seem glib, but I just think that I don't know. That's where a lot of the excitement comes from. Like these are difficult topics, difficult times. Things like there are things I talk about in that book where if we were in an office at 3 p.m. and you asked me, I'd say later. I'm busy. I'm staring at the screen right now, and I think that's kind of what makes books. One of the things that makes books amazing is you can kind of attack these things with intellect, with depth, with whatever degree of closeness or distance lets you really try to adjust this sort of knot of pain in the psyche, in the general culture, etc.
Thank you both of you. Just a couple of questions from our audiences. Let me just read. Monica asked Dennard and Aube. Going forward, do you plan to stay in the historical fiction genre? What did you learn from your experience that you do differently in your next book?
Great
Uh,
question. I have oh,
oh no, go ahead.
great question. I have at least one more idea in a sort of historical fiction lane. Different period in U.S. history. This would be around the 1920s if this manifests. But it is something I am a windmill I'm currently tilting right now. I find it very engaging. In terms of what I would do differently, that is a fair question. I don't know. There wasn't necessarily a looming disaster in terms of the process or creative of this whole thing. I think I would be less self-conscious about it. I might be a little more aggressive. I might be a little more aggressive in my attitude, in fact. So I guess I would try to write an even weirder book, and hopefully I'm getting there.
Oh, that precious on, man. How how the Dutch cannonball was pretty weird. Um,
Very true.
okay. Next question. Greg asked, how much did the size of your audience concern you as you were writing the book? Um, did we touch earlier? I feel like no. Did we?
I mean, I feel like the answer is you have to not be concerned about the size of your audience while you're writing the book. You kind of have to be delusional in a way and like hold multiple truth in your head. Like maybe everyone will love this book and maybe everyone will read this book and maybe this will be a book for everyone. And then also, it's okay if very few people read this book as long as it finds the people who, will resonate with it. And even if it changes like one reader's perspective on something, this will be worthwhile. So I feel like I just had both. I think when you're writing a book, it's such a long endeavor to write a novel. It's just like, tell yourself whatever you need to hear to move forward. But don't let the audience size kind of make you shift the work itself in order to, cater to an audience. Or I mean, I think it's also fair to be like, I want this to be very commercial. I want this to speak to a huge audience. And maybe then that means you write a more commercial book, whatever that means, and that's a deliberate decision. But in my case, with my first book, I was just like, maybe the whole world will read it, or maybe one person will read it, and I need to be fine with both scenarios and just push forward.
Cool, 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 cool,
That
cool.
that is very well put. I come from a similar position, but maybe alien logic. I've you know, in my weird arc, I've had the privilege of being like a pure novelist, and I've had the weird experience of being a pure advertising drone in another space. And that's kind of given me the attitude when it comes to the business side of things that there is no point marketing from the art studio and there is no point creating from the marketer's office. They are just two completely different stages of this process. Write your book, focus on just making the best creative product you can, and for over caffeinated insane people will be responsible for how this approaches the market. I think you are only doing yourself a creative disservice by being fixated at the typewriter, keyboard, whatever, with what potential audience this has. Because if you're talking book sales, everyone in a niche audience would be a much more of a coup even on that front than you know a marginal drip of everyone. You kind of just all you can really do with the keyboard is just focus on quality and your message. And I would read so and I like to the reason I kind of like to put it like that is anyone can hear the just the creative perspective, like it's about the art. It's about the art. Sales will matter, which it doesn't necessarily ring true to your brain because you would love to have a giant bucket of money. What I am saying is also on a very practical level. You just do not get much out of fixating on the market on your end.
True. It's yeah, that's I mean that's quite the line to end on. Oh, real quick, everyone. Yeah, we have one more question. I'm gonna ask one more question, and then we will wrap up. We're gonna go a bit over time. But then that last line there. Yeah, you don't. What was it? Something about the market. Don't focus too much on that one on your end. Um, that segues nicely into Andrew's question. What challenges did you guys have to find an agent and a publisher who are keenly interested in BIPOC historical fiction? So they guys took care of the market. How did you guys? What was it? Sorry. Um, what challenges did you have to find an agent and publisher who are interested in BIPOC historical fiction? Or well, that's what the question read as. Answer that how you will.
I'm gonna try to answer all the questions rapid fire. I think one of the big challenges, I mean, um, agents and publishers interested in BIPOC historical fiction are there. They exist. Um, but I think the market is very subjected to trends and biased towards trends. So the agents and publishers will be like whether they take on your book or not, or whether they buy your book or not, um, might have something to do with whether that genre or whether a certain type of story that's similar to yours had done really well in the recent past. So yeah, I think that's rather than focusing on like individual agents and publishers, I think that's kind of a force that you have to reckon with. But like Dennard was saying, this is not something you should be thinking about when you are writing your book. Because by the time you're done with your book or you're editing your book with an editor, who knows what trends will have come and gone and whether it gives you some headwind or tailwind. Like that's, you just can't predict it. You can only write the strongest book possible. But I would say, I wonder now if selling a book about China, I think it has a lot to do with whether publishers think readers are interested in books about China, whether stories about China have done really well or not. Did Crazy Rich Asians success have an influence on a book being bought or not? Does like K-pop success have an influence on whether people are interested in particular East Asian narratives? Like I think these are all factors. Um, Steering away from stereotypes, I think it's just kind of knowing what's out there in the historical fiction subject that you are writing about. And I think like talking to people who are tied to that milieu in some way. Like one of my biggest pet peeves is Westerners love writing about Shanghai's 1920s jazz and triad and gangster era. It's like 90% of books about Shanghai in the English language written by Westerners is about this like jazz gangster trope. And I'm like, if you ask a Chinese person from modern day Shanghai if this is like, I don't know, like that worthwhile, they'll be like, what? Like, yes, that's a part of our history, but why are white people obsessed with it? So I think sometimes just like talking to someone who might come from, um, like if it's a community that you're not a part of, just be like, hey, when I write about this, is this just kind of repeating a trope that Westerners or a certain demographic have always had a fascination for? That feels kind of like old and overdone and inexplicable to the people who are actually descendants of those written about. Um, and Carolina, to answer the first question, I don't consider myself a historical fiction writer. My second book is set in contemporary France, but it deals with 36,000-year-old prehistoric cave paintings. And like that comes with a lot of history. So I think there's a way to be like, historical fiction will always exist as like a thread in my work in some way, probably. Okay, that was a lot. That was my attempt to answer everything.
Then are
That
you
was a good stab at everything. All right. Hold on, let me do a quick recap of everything. Okay. So challenges to find an agent and publisher. It was an interesting road. Finding the agent. If I were to be fully honest, this is a slog ever. I think it's just extra footwork coming from this background, finding an agent who is necessarily a good fit for the kind of perspective that you are bringing with the work. And it is possible for there to be a false start. I think that you just kind of, if it takes, 7 layers of psychic resilience to go through that craziness by default in writing, I would just put an extra one on there for this, minority perspective. Like it was a slog. There were things that happened, like that whole "dear white people" kerfuffle I referred to. Otherwise, you kind of need to. I wouldn't even say like develop a thick skin for it, because you kind of need to be able to detect that kind of moment, but just be braced for that to be an extra pool of weirdness that can come in the process. And yeah, be ready for a lot of foot slogging. How to best steer away from historical stereotypes. I think that the best antidote, in my view, is to just try to engage with the material as closely as possible, read other stuff that's been in that lane. And like O pointed out, you'll see certain things that are over or underrepresented versus, what people have lived or what they're engaged with. And hopefully, hopefully with your conscious intelligence, you can see, everything here is about these jazz gangs. Maybe I'll go left. And I think as long as you are going in earnestly and putting in that effort to see what kind of like the landscape is like, and kind of a bit of a like, you will end up in a good place with that.
Okay.
And let's see. Thank you. First question. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you for all your responses. Seriously, very well. Like, I cannot even imagine. I cannot even have. This is my first panel, so thank you so much. Thanks everyone for showing up. Hope to have you guys back for another panel, maybe, or another interview, maybe. We'll see what we plan in the future. But yes, thanks for everyone else who showed up. Yeah. See you guys next time. One last thing. You guys can find Aube and Dennard's books on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and bookshop.org. We'll be posting more about their books following this panel. So yay, thank you. Yeah, there we go. That's it, right?
Thank you,
you.
Ian. It's 2 a.m. for you, I think, so I hope you get some sleep. Thank you so much.
Ian, thank you for your wonderful coffee-fueled performance, and thank you to the audience for the wonderful questions. And thank you for being here and for providing a very important shield for my mind blanks. So I
Always
had
happy
a
to
great
serve.
time.
Thank you.
Back next